Thank you very much, Bedouin, and good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure being here this evening. I'm going to look this evening at what infrastructure is, what is so special about infrastructure projects, why it matters that they're delivered successfully, and some factors that might help us to do so. And I might say this is the first presentation I've made without referring to Construction 2025. So I'm not going to this evening refer to Construction 2025 at all. But let me start by looking at the nature of infrastructure. So what is infrastructure? So infrastructure is the physical fabric that underpins the built environment. It supports economic activity around the world, and it enables society to function efficiently. And a convenient classification for infrastructure is two types. First, economic infrastructure, and secondly, social infrastructure. So what do we mean by these things? Economic infrastructure, transport systems is the one that first comes to mind. Road, rail, air, ports, marine, transport infrastructure. Secondly, energy generation and distribution. Thirdly, water supply, waste recycling and disposal, telecommunications, flood defence. All of these things are categorised as being economic infrastructure. And then we have social infrastructure. Social infrastructure includes health and welfare facilities, hospitals, health clinics, etc. Education facilities, schools, colleges, universities. And public services such as police stations, courts, prisons, fire stations. Public amenities like libraries, museums, parks, public gardens. There's probably more, but these are all included within the area of social infrastructure. The social infrastructure also includes housing, particularly privately owned social housing, but also I would suggest privately owned housing. Is this part of infrastructure? Or certainly society depends on it. Bedouin mentioned my last role as Government Chief Construction Advisor. And when I started in government, economic infrastructure and social infrastructure was part of my brief. But housing wasn't, which was rather interesting. But during my 3 years, housing sort of crept up the government list of priorities, and I might suggest that it's now one of the highest priorities in government. And but it was all a case of, well, housing's done over there, and the other stuff is done over here. So that's just sort of an example of turf wars in government, the joys of working in government. But eventually I got involved in housing as well. And as project managers and constructors, we have a key role both in creating infrastructure, new infrastructure, and also in adapting and upgrading and renewing existing infrastructure that's been built in previous generations. So infrastructure includes the whole spectrum of these things, including construction of new infrastructure and the maintenance and renewal of existing infrastructure. I want to look at the scale. Now, you'll see different numbers in different places, but here's some numbers to be going with. Globally, infrastructure investment in developed and emerging economies is estimated to be $35 trillion US of new infrastructure between 2007 and 2030. And the UK is spending something like £500 billion in infrastructure over the next decade, with a pipeline of large infrastructure projects. As I said, you may see different numbers. I'm not actually too worried about the numbers. The point is, it's huge. It's a massive investment in infrastructure, both here in the UK and globally. So it's a big business. And let's have a look at some of the things that are in the UK pipeline of major projects. First of all, major transport schemes. I show on here around 35% of the pipeline being in transport. All the things you've heard of: Crossrail, Crossrail 2, HS2, HS3, rail upgrades across the country, tube extensions and upgrades, a highways programme, airport expansion, wherever that might be, and port capacity. And if you add all of those together, according to my calculations, that alone is about at least £175 billion in the next decade. So a big chunk of what we're talking about is in transport. But another big chunk is in energy. And I reckon it's about the same sort of amount. So we're talking about new nuclear projects, Hinkley Point, Wilfer, other new nuclear build projects, offshore wind farms, interconnector projects. Huge amount being spent on energy. And on top of this, and you can see a bit of a breakdown here, but we've got, just to list some of the major schemes: Thames Tideway Tunnel, water and waste projects, flood defence, digital infrastructure, and then a whole range of schools, hospitals, healthcare, prison projects. Plus, going back to my previous definition, major regeneration and housing schemes, particularly in London and the South East. And this breakdown here, which is pretty nominal, I believe is quite typical of the breakdown of infrastructure projects globally. So it's that sort of order that we're talking about. So, massive scale. Now I want to look at why are governments globally creating new infrastructure. Why do they do it? Well, I would suggest there's a number of reasons: economic, social, environmental objectives, or normally, of course, a combination of all of these things. So let's just go through some of these things. Population growth. We have a continued growth in global population. We're on course for a global population of over 9 billion people by 2050. And coupled with this, there's an increased trend towards urbanisation. More people living in urban environments around the world. An explosion, if you like, of new cities around the world, all requiring infrastructure. But similarly, here in the UK, we're not building lots and lots of new cities, but we have an acute housing requirement, particularly in London and the South East, and there's a need for new towns, new regeneration areas, and all the infrastructure associated with those. There's also a real need to improve connectivity between centres of economic activity in these various countries. Hence the growth in high-speed rail technology and other linear forms of transport infrastructure. And here in the UK, we're in the process of building HS2 and of course planning HS3, and no doubt there'll be more lines. This time I hope there'll be more high-speed lines in the future. Perhaps we'll end up with an HS4 leading from London to the west. Who knows? And then we shouldn't forget politics. I believe that a lot of the reason that we build infrastructure projects is for political objectives. Governments find it necessary to play to political needs. For example, in the last UK government, we saw a big focus on the Northern Powerhouse. And indeed, I think this government is continuing the support for the Northern Powerhouse. And that means injecting infrastructure into what were previously somewhat neglected areas of the country. Cynics might say that's to attract votes. But I'm sure the same thing happens in economies around the world. And we've all seen many examples during election campaigns of ministers wanting to wear high-vis jackets and hard hats. And again, perhaps the promise of new infrastructure wins votes. So I do think politics has a fair bit to play in why we build new infrastructure. I'd like to look at what's so special about infrastructure projects and why are they so important. First of all, infrastructure projects are often of significant scale. We might call them mega projects. They're a high cost, hundreds of millions of pounds, billions of pounds. I learned earlier, perhaps I should have known this before, that a mega project is something that costs more than £1 billion. Well, depends on the context. But anyway, they're expensive. They have a long duration. The planning may take several years, or in the case of a new airport extension, several decades, depending on how politically sensitive the projects are. And delivery may take 3, 5, 6, 8, possibly 10 years. So they're long duration. They're also very visible. They're visible physically. Linear, we're talking about many infrastructure projects are linear projects, like new roads or new rail projects. So they're visible to lots of people, and they're also very visible in the media. So infrastructure projects have high visibility. They're also industry game changers. They're the opportunity to make a difference in the industry. I wasn't going to talk about construction 2025 this evening, so I won't. But because of the scale and visibility of infrastructure projects, they're a great opportunity to change an industry. Just coming up with a few examples. If you look at London Olympics, London 2012, I believe that was the real game changer in this country for health and safety. I think we've come a long way with health and safety in construction, but I think it was London 2012 that really turned the corner. And it's like a ratchet. You can turn it one way, but you don't turn it back again. So 2012 was a game changer. I think Crossrail is a game changer for BIM and digital engineering, which of course is now being used extensively in the design of HS2. So these big projects are the opportunity to make a change. Infrastructure projects are also big employers. They employ thousands of skilled and semi-skilled workers. And not just in the area where they're located. Crossrail supply chain, interestingly enough, extends across the whole of the UK. So every region of the UK has people working in some way or other on Crossrail. So they're big employers. And perhaps this is some form of Keynesian economics, putting money into these projects in order to change the economy. Perhaps something like rebuilding the sewers of Manchester is an opportunity to make a difference to the economy. And something else on infrastructure projects that makes them so important. They're controversial. Pretty much always infrastructure projects are controversial. Why are they controversial? Because of their scale, cost, visibility. Everyone has an opinion, it seems to me, on large infrastructure projects. They support them or they don't. Like the 3 H's, Hinkley Point, HS2, Heathrow. Everyone has an opinion on those 3 projects. And that, I don't believe, is just a UK phenomenon. I did some work in Hong Kong a couple of years ago, reviewing the high-speed, the express rail link from Hong Kong to Shenzhen to Guangzhou. And I can tell you, everyone in Hong Kong has an opinion on that project. So, infrastructure projects are controversial. So that makes them different, I think, and makes them quite important for a number of reasons. But historically, we've not been very good at delivering infrastructure mega projects. We've got a pretty poor track record. Historically, infrastructure projects have often been delivered very late. They've often blown their original budget, sometimes spectacularly, and they frequently failed to meet their objectives, at least at the time of opening. And I'd like to just give you some examples. The Channel Tunnel There was years late in delivery. Massive cost overruns. Undoubtedly, the Channel Tunnel was an engineering triumph, but as a project, I'd say it's clearly a failure. Jubilee Line extension for London Underground. Very late in delivery. It was nearly £1 billion above its original budget. The signalling system had to be de-scoped in order to open it. I was going to say open it on time, it wasn't on time. But in order to get it opened, they had to de-scope the signalling system and then work on it later. Not a great success, I don't believe. West Coast route modernisation, the upgrading of the West Coast main line from London to the northwest. That was several years late. The original budget for that, I can tell you, because I was involved in it, was £2.2 billion. And I remember the day when it was forecast some way into the project that it was going to cost £12 billion. It was descaled after that, and a much reduced project was actually delivered to bring it down within affordability limits. But I don't regard that as a success. The British Library, many years late, vastly over budget. Beautiful building, but it cost. The Scottish Parliament building, I actually did a review of the Scottish Parliament building. Late delivery, massively over cost, but again, I think it's a great building. So, not a very good track record. This one might be controversial. Terminal 5 at Heathrow. Now that project was delivered on time, it was delivered on budget, but unfortunately, when it opened, the baggage handling didn't work, and it got a very bad reputation. So, was it successful? I don't think so. So historically, we've got a pretty poor track record at delivering major projects in this country. Now, does it matter? I think it does matter. I think it matters for these reasons. I think it's bad for government confidence. If government's going to back major infrastructure projects, it wants the confidence to know that they can be delivered. Newtown infrastructure in Hong Kong, gas turbine power stations here in the UK, Docklands Light Railway in London. I've been involved in West Coast and East Coast rail upgrades. Yes, West Coast was one I said was a failure. I've been involved in Jubilee Line extension, the Dubai Metro, London 2012 Olympics, so we're starting to turn a corner. Crossrail, and a small involvement in Thames Tideway Tunnel. And for most of my career, we in the UK have looked overseas for examples of project success, places where they can deliver projects successfully. We used to look very much at Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a great example of project delivery. Singapore, Scandinavia. So we looked outside the UK for project success. But it's really interesting. In recent years, those countries are now looking here. They're looking at the UK. They're looking at what we're doing here and seeing successful delivery in the UK. Channel Tunnel Rail Link, now called High Speed 1, was a great success. London 2012, despite all its critics, was a fantastic success. Heathrow Terminal 2, again, a great example of an infrastructure project delivered on time, within budget, and to performance. Crossrail, it's not there yet, but it's looking pretty good. And I've got every confidence that we're going to succeed on that. So all of these have been brought in on time, on budget, and to the required level of performance. So other countries are now looking to the UK for examples of project delivery success. I talked about Hong Kong Express Rail Link, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. They were having big problems with that project. It's not finished yet, actually. And they've been looking to the UK at how we've been delivering our projects to see what they can learn from it, which I find really interesting, because it wasn't many years ago we were looking to Hong Kong. So I think that's really, really interesting. And they're not alone. Other countries are now looking here for how we're doing it. So why is that important? Well, I think it's important because I think it's good for the UK reputation. I think it's good for UK business. But, and this is the big but of the evening, if you like, I think it's fragile. I think it's really fragile. We only need to fail in delivery on one, perhaps we can get away with two, but a couple of major infrastructure projects, and we'll lose that reputation overnight. So I think there is a huge responsibility on those that are involved currently in delivery of major infrastructure projects here in the UK to continue to deliver projects successfully. I think there's a lot hanging on it. So what is at stake? I don't think it's just the UK's reputation at stake, although I think that's important. I think the reputation of the whole engineering profession and the project management profession is at stake here. And I think the timing is particularly important right now. We've got a desperate need for skills, big skills shortage across the whole sector in the UK. We need skilled operatives, we need skilled labour, we need engineers, architects, surveyors, project management. Great time to be in the industry, but we need those people. We've got an ageing workforce in the UK construction. The average age of people working in UK construction at the moment is 40, which might not sound very old, but roll that forward and you've got to ask, where's the next generation coming from? So I think the UK needs to attract the next generation into the construction industry. And I think that's quite complex, how it attracts the next generation. I think it depends on a number of factors, including salaries, job security, how sexy or sort of high-tech the industry is seen to be. And you might say, well, why is that special to construction? Because other sectors, let's take the IT sector, IT projects, they've had spectacular failures. They've had projects that have been months and months late, spiralling costs, failure to meet their objectives. Just look at universal credit, if that means anything to people in this room. The big IT project at the Department for Work and Pensions. It's a bit of a problem project. But despite this, the IT sector, I think, remains attractive, remains sexy. So I think it all comes down to the image of the sector. An image is formed by many factors, as I've said. But I think crucially, our reputation in delivering projects, delivering visible projects that everybody knows about, affects our reputation and affects our ability to attract the next generation into this industry. So, for that reason alone, I think there's a great deal at stake. It's important that we continue to deliver projects successfully. So, if successful delivery of infrastructure projects is so important, how can we ensure it happens? I used to work for a man called Mike Nichols. Some of you will have heard of Mike Nichols, the founder of the Nichols Group. And Mike's quest was to ensure the successful delivery of every project every time. How can we ensure successful delivery every time? And his thesis was that one of the main reasons for failure was that client sponsors didn't start by defining success. So perhaps no wonder they were disappointed. If you don't know what success is, how can you deliver success? And successful to whom? These are the sort of questions that I think we need to address. So the starting point for successful delivery is to define the success criteria. And having defined the success criteria, then design management processes to ensure that success is delivered throughout the project. You might regard that as some highly targeted form of risk management. And you may well have seen this before. This is taken from systems engineering. And I think we should learn lessons from systems engineering. And having attended a workshop earlier and heard some of the work that's being done at Thames Tideway, I think we are learning from systems engineering, but probably not enough. This is the V model. This is a rigorous process for validation. Validation means, are we building the right thing? And verification, which means, are we building it right? Is it the right thing? And are we doing it right? And apply systematically throughout each stage of the project, from the beginning right through to operation and maintenance. And in my experience, too many infrastructure projects are carried out without close attention being applied to defining the success criteria, and then without rigorous controls to ensure that success will be achieved. So this might look a bit complicated, but it actually is quite simple. It's exactly that. Defining the success criteria and then defining processes to ensure that success is achieved. And I believe it's high time for new thinking in this critical area. Another factor is innovation. Innovation has a key contribution to make to infrastructure projects, in making them more efficient in time and cost, in improving productivity, in reducing manpower requirements, and in reducing risk. Now, last year, the Construction Leadership Council looked very carefully at its infrastructure priorities, and it came up with these 4 categories of innovation that it thought were important for infrastructure projects. Industrialisation, basically learning from manufacturing industries by bringing production processes and techniques into construction. So this is about off-site construction, mass customization, standardization of repeatable components and processes. Really getting away from every project being a prototype. The second was smart infrastructure and smart buildings. This is about embedding sensors into buildings and infrastructure, connecting to the Internet of Things, benefiting from BIM at level 3 and beyond. So this is all about using technology to deliver new infrastructure and to make infrastructure more effective throughout its life. The third area, which really interests me, is new business models. Exploring new relationships between clients, designers, tier 1 contractors, the supply chain, insurers, and other parties, with the aim of cutting out waste, and I mean process waste. So this is all about making the delivery of projects more efficient and more profitable, so that participants can then invest in people, in plants, in processes and in research. And I think these are key ingredients in delivering projects more successfully. And finally, retrofit, recognising that a large part of the infrastructure that we need for the future already exists today, but needs to be upgraded and modernised to make it fit for today's use and tomorrow's use. So whilst the benefits of innovative process and products may be clear, we have to be careful, because I believe there's a risk in introducing untried elements into projects. So we need to de-risk the project by containing the development of new technology offline from the mainstream project, so that development of new technology is constrained and doesn't jeopardise the overall delivery of the project. But nevertheless, done properly, I think innovation has a key role to play. And another key ingredient is learning. Learning between infrastructure delivery organisations. This is perhaps an obvious point to make, but until recently it had not happened in any systematic or effective way. Learning has taken place, perhaps by accident, by key individuals moving from project to project when their project has been completed. Learning papers have been written about individual projects, but these have often been long after the event, and which reduces their immediate value. And I think the first organisation here in the UK to properly embrace the importance of learning was London 2012, the Olympics, which set up a dedicated website to capture the learning as a legacy for future infrastructure projects. But even this had its limitations. I'm pleased that the Infrastructure Client Group, which was formed back in 2011, is now working effectively as a forum of learning and sharing best practice between major infrastructure clients in the UK, and it's helping us to deliver our major projects more successfully. And I know that Andy Davis is working with a number of infrastructure organisations to help them share their learning and to improve the legacy value of their projects. And I also heard earlier today about I3P, the innovation learning platform that is a product that has come out of the Infrastructure Client Group. Nearly there. delivering value. About 5 years ago, I had the honour of being the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and it's become a tradition for IC presidents to adopt a theme for their presidential year, and mine was delivering value. And I talked about the growing recognition of the value of infrastructure by governments and society. And I pointed to a greatly increased level of scrutiny of infrastructure projects as investment plans came under greater and greater pressure as money became scarce. So we had the imperative to deliver more for less and to demonstrate value for money. At the same time, we face unprecedented environmental conditions, partly caused by an alarming growth in greenhouse gases. So we also have an imperative to deliver something I coined as being value for carbon. Getting the best value from our projects by the minimum amount of carbon emissions. And this, if you like, is similar to value for money. So we have these two things to achieve: value for money and value for carbon. And to quote from my own presidential address at the time, delivering value is achieving the maximum benefit for society and for investors from the resources they can afford. So fundamentally, whilst privately funded projects must deliver value to their investors, or to the shareholders of their investors, public investment projects have to deliver value to society, social value. I don't know if anyone heard Michelle Badley on Radio 4 Today programme last Friday. But I think this is what she was talking about, how infrastructure projects have to deliver social value. So we know that the business of delivering projects is different to the business as normal in an organisation. Projects, programmes, portfolios of projects, they're all about creating change. And infrastructure projects create change to the physical fabric of society. And as I say here, the business of infrastructure is really the business of change. So in conclusion, do infrastructure projects matter? Governments around the world are investing significantly in infrastructure projects. And we as project investment professionals, I believe, have a responsibility to deliver them successfully. We should strive to deliver successful projects every time. I believe it's quite possible to deliver successful projects every time. And we should recognise that it's about delivering value to society. And it seems to me that getting that right matters. Thank you.